Welcome everybody. I think that I can take off that particular slide now off the screen. And how do we do that? There we go, that's better. Right. So, welcome everybody to the second Sustainable Transport Task Force meeting. We've got a good attendance, so thank you very much indeed for managing to change the time in your diaries so that you can attend at 5:30 to avoid the clash that we had with the with other meetings and the technology. So welcome everybody. We'll do some introductions in a moment, but can I just ask if there are any apologies for this evening?
Sorry, we've had apologies from Carol Vella from the Chamber of Commerce, from Andy Farrell representing Chester Bid, and from Robert Pickering from British Cycling. Okay, great. Thanks very much indeed. Okay, hopefully you can all hear okay. I'm looking at the moment at the participants list, and all being well, if you need to ask a question at any time, if you just raise your hand, I'll spot it in that column. While I've got that column up, I don't actually see the chat side as well. So every now and again, I'll quickly flip over to the chat just to see if anybody's put a comment in there. But be aware, I'm probably more looking at the hands than the chat, but I will review it from time to time. Okay, so we'll do some introductions. I think everybody who's here was at the last meeting as well. I'm just wondering if anybody is new tonight. I don't think so. If that's the case, then what I think we'll do is just simply say hello and okay, yes, hello, and just simply say what your name is and what your title or what you represent, rather than give the kind of full bio that we did last time. So I think we'll start down my list with Bernadette.
Hello, good evening. Bernadette Bailey, Programme Lead for Living Well for Longer with NHS Cheshire CCG.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Bernadette. Dave Whitehead.
Hi, Dave Whitehead, I'm Chair of Huntington Parish Council.
Okay, and David Beer.
Hello, I'm David Beer. I'm Senior Manager with Transport Focus at the National Watchdog.
Okay, thank you. Christy?
Christy Littler, Cheshire West and Chester Council Transport Manager.
Okay, Lynn Mackay?
Lynn Mackay, Cheshire West and Chester Council.
Okay, and we've got Mike Hogg, I think it is.
Hello, I'm Mike Hogg, and I'm the Chair of the Chester Business Association Group. And Vanessa Bond and I are alternating at meetings.
Okay, great, thank you. And then there's another Mike, which is without a surname.
Mike Garrett, apologies for that. And for today, I'm representing freight interests.
Oh, great, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And I have Nicola Said.
Hello all. I'm Nicola Said. I'm Commercial Director for Marketing Cheshire.
Great, thanks Nicola. And Peter Bulmer.
Hi, I'm Peter Bulmer, Chair of Great Bolton Parish Council.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. Roy Newton.
Hi everyone, I'm Roy Newton. I'm representing Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership.
Thank you, Roy. Stephen Perry.
Hi, I'm Stephen Perry and I'm representing the Cheshire West and Chester Active Travel Forum.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen. And we've got Stephen Hughes.
Hi, yes, I'm Stephen Hughes and I am Chair of the Chester Sustainability Forum.
Lovely, thank you very much. Tamara Hunt.
Hello, Tamara Hunt, Sustainability Officer representing the University of Chester.
Okay, thanks Tamara. Sean Trainer.
Yes, good afternoon everyone. Sean Trainer, Head of Highways and Transport at Cheshire West and Chester, helping with the Secretariat.
Great, thanks very much, Sean. Stephanie Ward. I think you might be muted, Steph.
Apologies. Hi everybody, I'm Stephanie Ward from Cheshire West and Chester Council, helping to facilitate the meeting.
Excellent, thanks very much, Steph. And I think I spotted a name up at the top, which I might have missed. Alex Bell.
Hello, my name is Alex and I'm representing the Youth Senate.
Excellent, thank you, Alex. Thanks very much indeed. And then we have a lot of people who are attending, which is great. So thanks very much indeed for your time here. We'll do some introductions later on when we get into the breakout room. I think what we'll do now is we'll head down the agenda, and I'll ask if anybody has any declaration of interest to the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight, which you feel might affect things. Okay, I'll take silence as nothing there. So you will have, hopefully, the minutes of the last meeting. I think I'll do two things with those, if I may. I'll firstly ask if anybody's got any corrections which they feel should be made. Once we've done that, I'll then go down the matters arising and pick up any of the points that needed action last time. So firstly, can I ask if there are any incorrect statements in there which you feel we need to change? So I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm assuming that we can take those as read. So thank you very much, Christy and the team, for putting these together. So now let's run down the minutes.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if it would help if one of us projected the minutes on the screen for you and then we could scroll down them.
Okay, that would be good. Thank you very much. Yep. Gives me a chance to have a glass. Lovely, thank you very much. So we'll scroll down then to item 6, I think. And in that background, Sean last time laid out a very clear rationale for why the task force was set up. And I think that within that section, we've got some fairly important statistics and also a very clear direction of where we are heading with this task force. So I think that that particular section 6 is important as far as kind of focusing us and aligning us to the hand. On that bit further down the meeting, but you can see as we scroll through that there are some statistics there which are vital. And we need to always have these in the back of our mind as we move forward. And these are the kind of statistics plus many others which are driving us forward. So I think, and that's all I wanted to kind of highlight in there. But if we move down to observations made by members, we note Andy's comment there about the Chester being an incredibly special place, and there's a real opportunity here to think about enhancing its viability and vitality via the things we do here to create more livable spaces. I think this is absolutely key. So I don't think Andy's here tonight, but I want to thank Andy for that comment. And then over the page, we've got comments from Rob Pickering, and he's bringing the point. I don't know if we can move on to the next page. Yep. about the fact that, you know, we do need to kind of introduce behavioural change in the way that we address some of these things to do with climate change, and certainly that again is part of our particular agenda. Thanks, Roy, as well, for endorsing those comments last time, advising that transport is a mean to an end. And the Department for Transport has funding available for measures this forum can devise. That's worth keeping at the back of our minds, because as we go forward and we develop these particular initiatives, which we're going to be talking about a little later, then it may be that we can take advantage of some of these things that Roy could point us towards. And David Beer endorsed these comments also, and brought up the very useful mantra of cost, convenience and complexity, and that's one of those things which I've started to remember. So David, thank you very much for that. There are a couple of actions arising from that. So to provide a dedicated areas for members to access documentation relating to the task force. So I wonder if I could ask the Secretary as where we might be with that particular item.
Chair, if I come in on the item in 6.1.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Gaffer. We're just trying to finalise that sort of technology arrangements for members. We'll get a file folder on the team set up here for task force members to be able to see and access the shared data. So we'll look to do that in the next couple of days for members.
Okay. Now that's going to be very useful, because I mean I think the team's superstructure for handling documents for this kind of thing is very good. It's well tested, so it should work quite well. I think also, Sean, while we're here, have you got an update on 6.2?
Yeah, I was going to do that as well, Chair. So Councillor Margaret Parker made a request last time about could these events be webcast, and we explained last time there was a conflicting meeting, so again we couldn't use that technology. To a degree, that's a similar case tonight. We've obviously got another council meeting that commences at 6 p.m. But I think that the important reason why we're not able to webcast tonight, albeit this session is being recorded, and again, like the first meeting of the task force will be uploaded in the coming days. One of the main reasons that we can't webcast it, because we're going to go out into those breakout groups shortly. So actually you couldn't project live the 3 sessions that we're going to have shortly. So recording has been deemed the appropriate means for this evening, but we'll review that again in future sessions as well. We'll keep that on our minds. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Sean. So if we move down into section 7, and then there's some more observations made by members there. Endorsement for the provision for an accessible data sharing centre. I think one of the things I'll be talking about later in the meeting is exactly this, but I think as Sean's just described, we will be having a resource in Teams, and I'm quite used to Teams from the university, and you can get very good detailed structure of holding files and categorizing them and separating them. So we will be using that for the data which we feel we can share. A recognition of the need to keep traffic flow moving. Yes, I mean, as you know, there is a discussion in what we might call the other house taking place at the moment, or very shortly anyway. I think that they're well aware of the concerns that there are regarding that particular item. And I think that has been passed up, and people are fully aware of the need to understand what we can do about that. I think it might be useful for me to point out at this point that this particular task force is not solely concerned with that particular issue. I think that whilst we are waiting to see what happens with any decision that's made this evening, we just have to kind of sit back and say, well, okay, let's wait and see what happens next. There are certainly some lessons learned, which I'm going to be talking about later in the meeting, as far as what we can do in the future to make these kind of things less, if you like, problematic. But I think as far as direct actions at the moment, we'll just need to wait and see what happens. It's possible that we may get some action back down here into the task force, or there may be, I have no idea at all. It's not my area. I have no access to that. So
I just thought I'd kind of raise that now. Task force members are able to and will consider matters through the lens of vehicle drivers, absolutely. And once again, I will talk later about the way in which I want to extend the membership of the task force by little subgroups of people that we can capture their initiatives and feelings. Acknowledge the general frustrations over lack of communications as residents and key stakeholders want to be part of the decision-making process. Absolutely, that's key, and that's certainly key to the way that I want to move this task force forward. And I think when we come to the discussion groups, you'll see that I'm now including everybody in one discussion group or another, so that we get the full engagements here. Recognition for the need of meaningful engagement, openness and transparency. Yes, I think I'm already hinting at what we're going to be doing there, and as much as possible we will put everything in these areas so that you can access it. Need to reach out to the silent majority, elderly and minority groups. Again, this will become clear as I move further down the agenda and introduce some of the things that I'm hoping to do. It's not always going to be possible to reach everybody through this particular meeting at this particular time. So one of the things that I'm hoping to do is to, between the meetings, is meet different groups of people who can have a direct input on the way we move forward. And then finally, need to provide suitable mechanism for wider parish council and community engagements, which I think I've just covered in the points above, where I do intend to work with separate groups if they can't be represented on this particular meeting. So I think hopefully I've addressed the observations or made a note on those. If we move down to, I think we've got.
Sorry, Garfield. I had just put my
Steve.
hand up there, but yeah, just one observation that I think I made in the last one that maybe it wasn't quite captured there was the need for supporting resource around any actual infrastructure on the ground, supporting resource in the forms of whether it be electronic apps, the bus timetables, the integration of any transport system that there is. Yeah, the need for supporting material as well as infrastructure, I think is something that could be in there, and yeah, is hopefully going to be a topic of ours in one of our future meetings.
Okay, that's useful. Yeah, that's useful. I'm sorry, I don't remember that one, but it's a very useful point. So thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
I might talk to you separately about that, Stephen, because it's quite an interesting idea. That. Okay, can we move down to the actions 8.1 to 8.3? Just make sure we pick those up. So the terms of reference that we discussed last time in some detail, it was suggested that we incorporate high quality, vibrant and livable communities within that. I think they've probably been updated, have they, Christy?
Yeah, I think we're just waiting for the final comments, so we'll incorporate the comment that's just been made and then we'll get them posted onto the Sustainable Transport Task Force section of frequent asked questions in the interim.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much indeed. And that's probably a point worth pointing out, is that's where these minutes and the videos and things like that are being held at the moment. They're in the frequently asked questions of the Active Travel Forum, and so you can find them there, and then they'll move over to the Teams base once we have that set up. So chair to develop and share proposals for the formation of subgroups by theme, absolutely, and you'll hear more about that very shortly actually. And chair to develop and share proposals for wider parish council and community engagement, which I think I mentioned just in section 7 above. That is something I will be taking on board either directly into this meeting or separate sub-meetings afterwards. So I think that is that. If anybody else has any thoughts about the terms of reference, I would like to seal these off today. So Stephen, you've got a comment, I think.
Just one point to Garfield. I think it's hinted at with some of the words we've used, but not specifically. I think we need to be mindful of the need of people with mobility and disability issues.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that aspect is huge, isn't it? It's a major consideration now in anything we do as far as transport and accessibility is concerned. So yes, thank you for bringing that out, and we'll put something in the terms of reference to make sure that that is brought out. So thanks again, Stephen.
Thank you.
Anybody else, any comments on the minutes or the terms of reference before we move on? Mike, did you have your hand up then, Mike?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
briefly, should we have make any reference to the economy?
Well, the economy is one of the groups that was suggested in the last meeting for, actually they're in the terms of reference as well, as one of the groups that we will subgroups that we'll probably set up. I mean, what we're hoping to do, and I'm going to be coming on to that next actually, is to identify the areas which we feel need addressing urgently and first. And it's almost certainly they will have an economic effect, they will have a transport effect, they will have a public effect, etc. So it's my intention then to kind of form the working groups, which I'm about to talk about,
Okay.
that would actually go into each of these. So you're right, Mike.
Okay, so long as there's some kind of reference to the economy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
okay, that's good.
Crucial. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, right, so we've got on the agenda now some breakout groups, and most of you will probably be familiar with breakout groups from various other organisations and meetings that you attended. So, what I thought I'd do first is I just want to kind of contextualise what I want to do with these breakout groups, both now and at future meetings. So excuse me for reading this, but it's something I wrote earlier, which I just wanted to capture all the thoughts that I had, and I just want to make sure I don't miss anything, you see. So, and you can comment during the Mike's still got your hand up. Is that just a hangover, is it? I'll lower it for you, I think. Oh, he's gone. Great. So just to remind you, this task force is firmly rooted in the terms of reference. These were agreed at our last meeting. Its rationale is directed by the need to respond to the climate emergency declared not only across this borough, but across the world. It's also directed by the need to adopt sustainable methods that do not cause undue harm to people or the planet. And it is also directed by the need to see people adopt a more healthy lifestyle, helping not only themselves, but also the health services. So these, if you like, is the root of the work that we're going to be doing in the task force. And it's very clearly laid out in the first page of the terms of reference. The timescales by which we must effect the necessary changes are very tight. 2030, the year by which we must have made major reductions in the emission of greenhouse gases, is only 9 years away. And given the time it takes to discuss and implement strategies, we really need to start work on these now. To be an effective task force, to be good at what we do, we need a plan of work, and we need to deliver on those plans. The tasks we work on will come from a variety of sources. They may come from the government, as with gear change under the recent initiatives. They may come from the council. The current drain works are a good example of where they might come to us and say, okay, can you ask your people what they think about these plans? Examples of good practice from other towns and regions, and the concerns and ideas that business and the residents of our borough have. So these 4 directions will feed into the work that we do in the task force. These topics will, I believe, come to us quickly, and we'll need to organise ourselves into working groups around particular themes to achieve these ends. Which means there's going to be much work to do between our meetings. We may well need to co-opt and invite experts who can help us in our work. I think it's going to be very busy. I mentioned examples of good practice. There are a growing number of towns and cities that have been down this road already and have had good advice to share. Oxford, York and London. Don't forget London, with the way that they tackled things like the congestion charge and the cycle lanes down there. They were major achievements, major changes. And there are numerous other examples across Europe.
One highly successful scheme is that employed in Groningen in the Netherlands, and I've invited the person responsible for implementing their active travel scheme to talk to us at our January meeting. And there will be other speakers in the month after that, and I'm hoping that I'll link those speakers with the themes that we need to be concentrating on at the time. Generally, there will be a discussion following the presentations, and in order to ensure everyone has a chance to contribute, we'll break into smaller groups. And I think when you're in those smaller groups, it's much easier for you to kind of say what you want to say, or at least put something in the chat. It's quite difficult when you've got a group of nearly 30 to capture everybody's views. So I believe that the discussion groups are a good way of doing that. So we're going to trial that today. So in a short while, you'll be asked to leave this meeting and then join another one. And hopefully you've all had a second link that you can join to. And then obviously at the end of that session, you'll leave that particular meeting and you'll come back into this one again using the link that you did when you started today. So we're going to break into 3 groups, and I'm grateful to Stephen Perry and David Beer for agreeing to chair 2 of these discussion groups. I'm going to be leading the 3rd, and I'll be talking to our community representatives about the issues that concern them. These discussions will not be recorded. I think it's important that people don't feel that they're under pressure to say the right thing and may make a mistake or something like that. So it's up to the chairs then to capture the points that are being made in those meetings so that we can get a clear view on the things being said. Once we come back into this room, we'll be back on the recording again, and the points that were raised in those meetings can then be captured, but none of the kind of conversation that went in between time. I'd ask you not to hog. It's very easy once you've got a bee in your bonnet to kind of take a lot of time. I think we've got 40 minutes allocated for this, and that'll soon pass. So be aware that other people will probably want to say something, and kind of keep the traffic moving along. I think that's probably it. To be clear, the first and last parts of this meeting will be recorded. Yep, so this part that we're in now is being recorded, and the part that will follow when you come back in here will be recorded. And we'll also be reviewing the chat before we actually publish the chat. So the hope is that this gives us our first idea for topics that we can look at in the task force. I think even one solid one that came out of tonight would be a good start, but I'm hoping there are going to be a few more than that. I stress though that the discussions are to be based around the questions you see in the agenda. I've included a question on communications and the way we can improve the two-way flow of information. I see this as important to prevent the miscommunications that have occurred recently. So I hope you'll take that opportunity to maybe put some of those things into there as well. So, right, I think we're ready to go. And my team feeling good about this? Yes? So can you, sorry, Kirsty, yes, Christy, sorry.
It's okay. I was just about to say that you're staying in this main room with the observers, and the rest of us are going off to another group. That's all I was going to confirm, that's all.
Okay, so it's 6 o'clock now, so we'll be back in here at 6:40.
Sorry, should everyone have had a link then?
I believe you've all been sent a second link.
Okay, I don't see one.
Where would it be, Lynn?
It should be in the second invite, should have been sent. So Mike, you should have had an invite to group 1.
I can send that,
Lynn,
Christy.
so if you send that, yeah, to
Send
Mike.
it again then, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Okay. Garfield, if it's okay with you, I'll stop recording of this meeting now.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have lost anybody, which is always good in these situations. So this part then is where I'm going to ask my 2 chairs, and once again thank you, David and Stephen, for what you've done. Hopefully it went well. So I think going alphabetically, David, can I ask you first for how you got on with your team?
Thank you. Yes, somebody has to be first, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you. It went very well. I'm not sure we necessarily had enough depth of time to be able to do justice to the questions, because I think they are quite deep questions. What we wanted to understand first of all is what the kind of remit is that we're looking at in terms of the goals that we were aiming at. So we broke it down to give it a structure from the remit of the task force, and picked out key points from the remit. So we thought it was around the town centre economies, health and well-being, improving delivery, those words of ambitious and inclusive, and then to make sure that that was across the gamut of public transport provision and active travel. So that was the kind of structure we were looking at. Mike Hogg chairs the local groups across across Cheshire.
Craig.
Yes, so it's very much the residents associations, the group of residents associations across the borough, and they have already identified top 5 topics, which includes transport. So they've got a position paper. So Mike has very kindly offered to share that with the group, which might give us a little bit more insight into what residents are talking about.
That's useful.
There are some key opportunities that we're talking about, mostly around being ready for the future, but also around making sure that the rural communities are more effectively included, not just to connect them to into Chester, but also within their rural communities. There's also an opportunity to build on the political goodwill that we've got at the moment, governance, link up with schools, the sets of officers we've got to be able to make change and cooperate together. But the key opportunity really is being ready for funding. Looking at the sort of problems that we perceive, there's a lack of coordination. There's potentially a confusion over who's in charge, whether it's the elected members or whether the officers are leading it. So, for example, tonight there's the conflict between the task force and the council meeting. So there's potential confused messages being put out. There's a need to get everybody on board across Cheshire West and Chester, in terms of all the different departments and groups that there are, that if this is going to be something that is a strategy that overarches the pathway to reducing carbon across Cheshire West and Chester, for example, that needs everybody's buy-in and everybody to be on board. That need to be ready for funding could be a problem if we're not, because if we haven't got ambitious ready plans, then potentially we could miss the funding. So that there's potential problems there. There's a problem if what's being provided isn't wanted and supported and people want to use it, because it's not a case of build it and they'll come. You've actually got to provide something that's attractive, so potentially engage in some dream solutions. It's no good having cycle routes, for example, if they are dangerous for people to use. There was a suggestion that there's a benchmark of, would you let your 12-year-old cycle that route alone? Yes. Which is an interesting one. Priorities, we felt that if there's a lack of coordination, then there's a priority there to fix it. There's priorities to be ready for the funding, to have ambitious ready plans to make sure that we are ready. In terms of engagement, we started running out of time here, so you'll see that the fact that the bullet points get shorter. But the engagement, we felt that it was really key to get young people on board. They're the next generation. And Alex spoke quite well and articulated the fact that getting young people on board was absolutely key to this. And he suggested the Youth Senate would be a useful way of getting people on board, along with schools and colleges. And just talking about the communication, obviously the residents association groups, but also Good for Nothing, the network group across Destination Chester, and it's also important to ensure that we've got an understanding of where people are coming from. So engage and ask people their own views. So there seems to be a lack of data across Cheshire West and Chester for sort of right across the borough, which could stymie us in terms of being ready for freight solutions. But also there needs to be an understanding of what people's views are across the borough. So where are people coming from? What are their perceived barriers? What's the attractive transport that they want to see, the journeys that they actually want to make that need to be provided for? So there's a real need to reach out and ask people for their views. Anybody else in the group, if I've missed anything, if they want to pipe up?
No, excellent summary, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, David, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to that group as well. I mean, there's a whole host of stuff there, some of which overlaps with the with some of the stuff that I got from my own group. But I'll kind of try and work something at the end of this so that we can pick up some of these common points. So, but I'll go to Stephen next. Yes, Stephen.
Yep. Thanks, Garfield. What I'm going to do actually might be slightly easier. I shall type up for you and share with you all the points raised.
Yep.
But in terms of not wanting to overwhelm you, I'm going to start with the summary, the sort of the prioritization that we ended up with when we discussed question 3, which really picks up a lot of the subdivisions. Point 1 was about incentivizing people to use the existing public transport, making it more attractive, more practical, all the 3 C's that Dave's referred to, with lots of examples of, for example, having more weekend transport, for example, providing better transport for school, particularly secondary school people, so it means that people don't have to run their children to school and things, and considering alternative pass schemes and schedules. So basically just to make public transport more attractive in the wider sense of the word. The second thing was about having a much better understanding of the barriers and the issues that we're trying to address and that we'll face as we try to make changes. That we see as an opportunity. So that's an opportunity to grab. It sounds like a threat, but if you can work it correctly, it's an opportunity. The third point was about connectivity and continuity. So, for example, looking at multimodal transport systems to make the connections easy, so buses and trains connect, but also maybe putting bike racks on the back of buses so people can go to work in 2 different ways or go to wherever in 2 different ways. Continuity, you know, I'm a cyclist. Coming to the word end on the road doesn't help anybody, especially the 12-year-old we're thinking of. There has to be continuity. So if we're going to put things in, think of it as a continuous process, accessing the city or crossing the city or the cities or the towns around us. So those are the 3 very strong themes that came out. In addition, a plea to better use technology, both in terms of sharing information on services, information on times, all those sorts of things, but also continuing to encourage people to work from home to limit the extent to which they have to travel. Specific comments about thinking more deeply about what we need, what solutions are right for the problem. So maybe bus lanes aren't the right thing for cycle lanes and things like that. And in all cases, making sure the environment is safe for people to use. And again, the 12-year-old child is a good example. So those were our opportunities, well discussed and put forward with energy and enthusiasm. The problems again, they really come down to 2 or 3 fairly group things. We will not get total support from everybody. We will always have opposition. We will not get consensus. So accepting that and managing the consequences is essential. And that means we have to be honest and open and direct and innovative in the way we communicate. That's a lot of comments around that. The second point is to make sure that we get multi-organisation involvement in order to try to bring people together and an early engagement to address these things. Clearly, there's a question of funding, affordability, whatever we talk about in terms of making things happen. So that's the problem. How do we get the money? Where does it come from? But the solution, we feel, is that if we do really have well-planned plans, well-defined things, with long-term opportunities, with the engagement of local people, engagement of our partners, certainly there's a feeling that there's money to be had if we have the right package to put forward. And then the third thing was about, and it's implicit in what's already been said, but the fact we talk about change management. You know, it might be painting on the floor, it might be buses rather than cars or whatever, but it's about change management. And we have to recognise the behavioural change aspect that we have to manage and be active in managing that. The final point was about communication. Again, it's been hinted at before, it has to be clear, it has to be inclusive. So there's a lot of thought about what we communicate, the way in which we actually offer that communication, the content of the communication, honest, open, clear, direct. We've also got to remember that we've got to be inclusive in terms of not leaving out people that don't have access to the internet. We must not rely on social media, or at least allow social media to be a distraction as it can be. It's not necessarily representative. So the way, the mechanics by which we communicate is important. In terms of practical detail, we feel that communication for us as members of this group, the Teams forum, is adequate. Good, I should say, not just adequate. For the community, again, it's about decluttering the message, but maybe thinking about other means of championing what we're doing, maybe having a champion or two, you know, a Chris Boardman type figure or other people in the community, about having venues where people can go, drop-in shops or premises where they can actually see what's going on as part of the communication. And the other thing that was mentioned about maybe having a very easy to access website on sustainable transport. At the moment, you can't find that on the website, the QAC website, and we should have something which is very accessible. I think that covers the main points.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. I'm still scribbling here, but
you said I should write this down for you. Don't worry, Garfield. I've got it.
Well, I mean, no, that's fine, and it was just really so I've got something I can kind of link some points together. But I'll talk about the topics that we discussed in my group then, which was, I mean, it sounds like both your groups were very active, and mine certainly was. And I must thank my group because they came out with some really very, very good, not so much ideas, but really kind of points of common sense, if you like, that we really should be kind of taking on board. And some of these have already come out in what we've heard from the other groups. Identify the low-hanging fruit early on, things that we can kind of make quick wins and get people's confidence, so that we can say, well, okay, you know, the task force has managed to make this happen. I mean, at the end of the day, we want these things to happen naturally so that people benefit from them. But obviously, if we're going to try and get the task force to be a place where people come to, in order to be able to discuss and suggest things, we want to be able to show them that we can actually have some things that move forward. So I think some low-hanging fruit, you know, whether it be problems with local traffic lights that we can maybe get fixed quite quickly, or other things. So I think that I think Doug was talking about some of these things here. And then Roger from Tarvin was suggesting that in a lot of cases people don't know what it is that they
should be doing. They're not aware of the things that they could be doing in order to help things like turning off your car engine at certain positions for certain lengths of time and things like that. So perhaps some kind of literature that we could put out and not depend too much on social networking all the time to do this, because social networking is fine. You can get out to people quickly, but goodness me, we're all overrun with it. There's so much of it, you know, and finding information amongst that is sometimes quite difficult. And I still think there's a place for good old fashioned leaflets through the door, because I still think they work. I certainly read them anyway. So communications to residents, yes, that was right. Caroline came up with some, well, firstly, she said that she's raised a lot of ideas in the past, which have just kind of not found their way through. And so I'm suggesting that Caroline resends those to us so that we can look at those and stir them into this pot of ideas that we seem to be generating at the moment. And I said I would circulate my email address to the people on this call tonight so that you've got my STTF, my task force email, so that you can actually send ideas through. I think also the schools situation was raised quite a lot in the fact that it's not always straightforward for people to kind of get their children to school without driving them. School buses are an issue in certain areas. The fact that there are no pavements or other ways of getting children to walk to school is also another thing. And of course, sometimes the school is on the way to somebody's work, so it's a natural thing for them to drop them off on the way. So these are the kind of things at the moment that we kind of say, well, okay, let's look at ways around this. Are there any lessons that we can learn from the lockdowns that we've had and the social distancing that we've had to put in place? Is there anything that we can do to adopt some of those methodologies in the long term when we're out of this situation that we're in at the moment? I still find it incredible, really, that after everybody's been working at home the best they can, and I know not everybody can, but you know, the traffic is back up to normal, it seems to me. There's so much traffic on the road. It just seems to me the natural thing is that people are just jumping back in the car. Well, you know, we do need to address that. Yes, the long-term strategy. Now, this has been mentioned a few times. It was mentioned last month, and it certainly cropped up in both David and Stephen's groups, is do we know what the long-term strategy is for climate emergencies and for the economy and for everything else wrapped into that? You know, what is our 10-year plan? If we can see a 10-year plan and we can divide it up into stages and we can say, well, okay, we need to achieve that by then. So is there anything we can do to kind of get the community geared up for that? Are there schemes we can put in place? And then as you pointed out, we can then start looking at funding to help us do that. Because what usually happens with funding is that the funding is tied to a local initiative, an initiative or government initiative, but it's a current initiative is what I meant to say. It's tied to a current initiative. So if you can prove that the work that you want to do is tied to that kind of initiative, then I think we'll get somewhere. So going back down to the list, we again, a lot about schools here. A very sad note regarding an accident at Christleton on a cycle lane Monday this afternoon. We haven't heard how the young person is yet, but apparently that was somebody who, I think it was a 12-year-old, Helen. He was cycling in a lane and unfortunately had an accident. So the air ambulance was called out. So, you know, we do need to look at these. Are these new lanes that we have, are they safe? Can we depend on them? Would you allow your 12-year-old child to cycle in them? I think the where are the topics, but I've got them all written down here. Kate asked about the aims of the group and how this will affect some of the things that have been happening recently regarding the bus lanes. How can we actually take that forward? Well, obviously the lessons learned from this particular incident are pure, if you like, meat for us to work with. And I'm sure that things will come out of the situation that we're in at the moment that we need to pick up and move forward on. I think we need transparency over funding when these things happen. We need to make sure that people have, if you like, sight of some of the things that are going to happen before they're introduced, so that we can actually comment on them and so on. So I think that, you know, that kind of transparency of where we're going is crucial as well. I think that going back over the 3 groups, if I kind of pick out the ones that have kind of resonated straight away, one important one that came out of my group was the idea of a pilot area, that maybe one that we could kind of target as being a kind of a microcosm of some of the issues that we need to work on. I mentioned Ashton Hayes and the work that they did on the green agenda, which I think was some like 10 or 15 years ago, which Roy Alexander at the university was a leader on. And that was then seen to be a really good example of, you know, good practice in those areas. They had all kinds of schemes and everybody in the village got involved, everybody contributed to it, and more importantly, everybody knew why they were doing it. Now, we're not a million miles away from the aims and ambitions of what we're trying to do and what Roy managed to achieve in Ashton Hayes. So maybe we can find another area where we could actually look at it as a pilot and see if some of the things we're thinking of could actually be adopted in there. And again, I'd welcome suggestions of that. I'm very keen that this is seen as to be borough-wide. I haven't had any representation in these 3 groups yet from Ellesmere Port or Frodsham or Helsby. I'd love to see those involved as well, because I think there are great opportunities there to get their communities involved as well. So enough of me waffling on at the moment. We have still got time for questions. Let me go back to the agenda for a moment and so we've got next steps and future group topics next. Let me just open it up first though, and let's see if anybody wants to add anything. If I've not mentioned something that was mentioned in one of my meetings, then that's just because I've written it down and I haven't mentioned anything. So who's got the hand up? Stephen Hughes.
Hi, yes. There was something that was really very interesting that was mentioned in our breakout group, and it was that Quack currently has only 7% of the bus. I'm not sure it was bus or public transport infrastructure as a whole. So that means that 93. There's a lot of talk about bus efficiencies, timetables, integrating all of that. If 93% have of the contracts are private, and as far as I'm aware, they potentially don't have representation here at this meeting, it might be something that's useful for future meetings that someone from I don't know, the major contractor is part of this, so that they so we're getting their side of things as well. Yeah, just a point.
Okay, I don't know if I can bring in David there. David Beer, do you want to maybe add a comment on that?
Interesting point. Yeah, the mainstay of bus service provision is on the basis of commercial viability. So the main bus operators will be the ones that are laying that down, and then that has to be overlaid by the council in terms of social necessity. Do we think that extending an invitation to the bus operators would be useful, or would it be that that's a group that we would want to reach out to and engage with outside of this task force? I think also the people who are actually living across the borough, because the commercial viability is going to leave gaps inevitably. So I think we would want to engage with the residents of across the borough to find out what their perception is for barriers, why they think that public transport isn't working for them. Your comment, Garfield, about the propensity for people to jump in the car as being the most convenient thing. Why is that? What is it that transport isn't providing for people and how do we get those views in. So is there a way, is there some a piece of work that the task force can maybe commission in terms of finding out what those views are?
I think that's an excellent idea, and that's the kind of thing that we can do. Okay, that's very good. Thank you. I've got Kathy has got her hand up. Yep, Kathy.
Thank you. I think it was just to say that we already have a group called the Sustainable Travel for Tourism Alliance, where quite a lot of the commercial bus operators are represented, and it was something that the zoo's been leading on for a while. But certainly, if we wanted an avenue or a forum to ask questions of some of those operators, they already come together as a group.
That could be useful then. Just picking up David's point about maybe having an outside link into this form there. I think that would be quite good. If so, do you sit on that then? Yeah.
One of my colleagues does, but between us, yeah, we can share responsibility between this group and that.
Okay, that'd be useful. David, we might pick that up then afterwards. Sean, do you have your hand up, please? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just a point following David's discussion there and Stephen on the bus network. We've obviously got a bus task force that's live currently as well. Councillor Paul Roberts chairs that. So there's been lots of similar activities that you're leading on here, with case studies, expert witnesses. David Beer kindly contributed to that. So I think you can link in with Councillor Paul Roberts, Garfield. I think that'll be really useful starting points rather than duplicate some of the work as well.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you very much indeed. And I apologise, I don't know all these various task forces and various other groups that are going on, but I will do. Yes. And Mike, I think you've got your hand up as well. Yeah, Mike.
Yes, Pete, it was just those 2 points. I think this conversation has highlighted what was mentioned in our group, is that coordination has been missing. And if this group can do anything to coordinate all these different initiatives, all which are positive but aren't linked up, that would be fantastic. And the second point, piloting is excellent. So again, for example, park and rides, if we have some great idea to enhance that, pilot it at one of the locations, not the whole lot.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, and I'm really warming to this idea of piloting. Need some ideas for little microcosms of areas that we could look at. I'm sure people have got ideas. Okay, so I don't see. Sean, is your hand still up, or is it? Have you got another point? Okay, it's gone. Right. Okay, so now I've got to somehow wrap all these up, and I've got.
Chair,
sorry, go on. Who's that?
Just make one.
David, yeah. David, yeah. I
think there was a really key point that came out in our group about engaging with young people.
Yes.
So I think in particular, I think the Youth Senate was something that Alex was quite keen for us to engage with, but potentially schools and colleges as well. So just to ensure that those aren't left out of our engagement profile. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. I think, Sean, you mentioned at the last meeting that this was a unique situation as far as setting up a task force like this was concerned.
Yeah, certainly when I've mentioned it to the Department for Transport, they're not aware of on this specific subject matter.
Great. So I think that this gives us an opportunity really to move Chester forward, or the borough forward, and people know my views on the wider borough, so that was not necessarily a slip. I think that we have an opportunity here to really move this forward and work very hard at this. The group I was with have all said they're very, very keen to continue with this particular group and look at the themes we're developing. I think if they've been listening to the feedback from the other two groups, they will see how these mesh really well, and how we can actually make one set of ideas work with the people we've been talking about and the problems they're having in the community. I think we should have a lot of pride
in the fact that we've got all this, material here that we can work with. And I just think now that it's a matter of trying to pull these threads together and move forward. I think if I pick out some kind of, I won't call them low-hanging fruit, but if I pick out some of the ideas that's kind of spring out from the from David and Stephen's group, I think to be ready for funding. I mean, I mentioned that a moment ago. Working in a university, you have to apply for funding in order to move research forward, and the way you do that is to make sure that you have everything ready, you have all the questions answered, and you have a proposal which is watertight. And then when it comes to the funding, you've ticked all the boxes and hopefully you're away. What we don't want to be doing is waiting for a call to come out and then suddenly scrabbling to try and get the information, and at the end of the day it's not good enough. So perhaps we need some kind of indication of what might be coming down the line. Some kind of hint would be useful, but I think just to some extent we can read the runes. And I think that most of the kind of government initiatives that are on the table at the moment give us a fair indication of where we might be going with some of these things. So I think that is one point that we need to perhaps pick out. I think another is the strategy, the long-term strategy. And I know I've had an initial chat with Sean about this, but perhaps we can look at that to see if there's a way in which we can kind of make a blueprint and maybe even publish part of that so that people can actually buy into this blueprint and know where we are and how we're doing on this. Not everything works. Not everything works straight away. Some things get delayed, but at least if people can see that this is what we're trying to do, then we can relate to that. And so I think that would be very good. I love the idea of ambition. And if we can link that to what I was saying a moment ago about the pride in what we're doing in this particular group, and be very proud of the work that we do and move it out into other groups and say, well, okay, there's a task force here. Let's put something to them and see if we can get something moving. I mentioned in the preamble to these discussion groups that, we will have work to do between these meetings. I'll be very active on this, and I'm always looking for people who would be happy to help in certain areas. I know Stephen and David have also offered their help between meetings to move things forward. I'm always welcome to listen to other people who feel they might be able to help, or at least have an organisation who could help in that. I think looking again through my notes, I think that's the main ones I've picked up. So there's a pilot, strategy, be ready for funding, develop an ambition, and develop a pride in what we're doing as a group. Look for low-hanging fruit, look for a pilot study area, and perhaps those might be the top ones that we've got at the moment, but we won't lose any of the others. It's just that they are the ones I think which kind of resonated in each of the groups that have met tonight. I wonder if I might just ask people if they felt that this format that we adopted tonight was useful and gave you an opportunity to kind of contribute. If you can, maybe I'll tell you what would be useful. If you can flash your hands up and then for a moment or two, if you felt that this was a particularly useful thing for us to do tonight. Oh, that's good. That's great. Well, thank you for that. I can see lots of hands here, so that's brilliant. Great, thank you for that. So the next meeting, hopefully we will have a colleague from Groningen to explain about some of the issues they faced as a city and how they actually managed to overcome them. And we'll be able to question them. And then once again, we'll move into discussion groups and look at some of the points they've raised. There'll also be a full opportunity in the next meeting to recap on all the points that have been raised in these three groups. So we've got a bit of work in pulling those points together. I don't think I have anything left for the agenda. Where's the agenda? Plenary session feedback, next steps and future group topics. I think we've covered that. And future dates to be agreed are on the bottom of that. I think the idea was that we'd meet every 4 weeks. It's very difficult. We had a clash tonight, and it's difficult to know what to do about that because everybody else is going to reserve the time in their diary. But anyway, those are the dates that we've got for the moment. I think that's probably
all for this evening. Anybody, any final questions? Okay, well, I'll thank you for your time. Thank you very much indeed. With a great deal of material today, all very useful indeed. I hope you feel it's been worth it. Thank you very much indeed. Good night.